West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Especially think President Trump. I don't think anybody should doubt his influence. He was with me from the beginning. Somebody wrote the doubt of whether he was there, and he was all in.
He was all in. Kevin McCarthy may be the speaker, but this is Donald Trump's house, built on the backs of Trump's Republican acolytes whose jobs depend on the support of Donald Trump's own base. The dynamics that were on display during the 4-day speakership battle have continued to play out in the 6 months since. The Chaos Caucus Republicans, many of whom are Trump loyalists and some of whom participated in the attempt to deny McCarthy the speakership, brought the country to the brink of economic default just a few weeks ago, encouraged by Trump to stonewall efforts to reach a deal on the debt limit. But McCarthy's speakership so far will likely be remembered for Republicans' many efforts to avenge Donald Trump, to take action against his critics, against those who would hold him to account, and to rewrite the narrative of his first presidential term in order to pave the way for his reelection. In January, Republicans quickly approved the so-called Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, chaired by the Trump henchman Jim Jordan, and seemingly created to validate and legitimize Trump's many grievances. Days after that, McCarthy blocked Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell from being reappointed to the important and powerful Intelligence Committee. Both men had served as impeachment managers and had earned the former president's ire. Since then, Schiff has also been censured by House Republicans. House Republicans have also spent time calling for the impeachment of the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, both on the basis of policy disagreements, not breaches of their office. Attempts to introduce articles of impeachment against President Biden even incited an argument on the House floor between Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, which led to Greene being ousted from the right-wing Republican Freedom Caucus. There's even an official attempt to expunge Trump's 2 impeachments, an effort that has received the approval of Kevin McCarthy, who told reporters, quote, "I think it's appropriate. You should expunge it because it never should have gone through," end quote. This is Donald Trump's House of Representatives, and Kevin McCarthy is just living in it. But Trump's rhetoric against federal law enforcement agencies and the executive branch is having a real effect well beyond Washington. It's pushed many GOP presidential candidates further to the right. It's forced them to make a vow to clean house if they get elected.
Well, I think 2.5 years of the Russia hoax undermined confidence in equal treatment under the law in this country. And if I'm president of the United States, we're going to clean house on the top floor of the Justice Department. And we're going to find men and women that are respected in both political parties, because they exist.
At the end there, Mike Pence implies that the Justice Department is currently filled with political lackeys who are biased against Republicans, people Republicans allege, like FBI Director Chris Wray. When the House returns to D.C. next week, Wray will testify before an oversight hearing led by Jim Jordan and the Judiciary Committee, and he's expected to be questioned about a number of things, including unverified allegations of a bribery scheme involving President Biden. But it's worth remembering, Wray was appointed by Donald Trump himself in 2017, who called Wray, quote, an impeccably qualified individual, end quote. The tragedy of the Republicans' campaign against the Justice Department is that they're chipping away at the legitimacy of the DOJ and the public's faith in it. And all the Justice Department is trying to do is hold to account the twice impeached, twice indicted so far Republican frontrunner who's risked our national security, weakened democracy, and remains under investigation. As Trump continues to demean the men and women of the Department of Justice and other members of the federal government, it's worth remembering the dubious and now disgraced lawyers who Trump recruited to help him overturn the 2020 election. Just yesterday, a disciplinary panel unanimously recommended that Rudy Giuliani be disbarred for his role in those efforts, saying that, quote, his malicious and meritless claims have done lasting damage, end quote. On Wednesday, Lynn Wood was basically forced to retire amid disciplinary probes by the State Bar of Georgia, and Sidney Powell is under scrutiny by special counsel Jack Smith as his investigation homes in on a chaotic Oval Office meeting during which Trump and his allies discussed, among other things, appointing Powell, Trump's lawyer, as special counsel to investigate baseless claims of election fraud. Joining me now is the former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, Charlie Dent. He's the executive director and vice president of the congressional program at the Aspen Institute. Also with us, Steve Bannon. He's the producer of The Rachel Maddow Show and an MSNBC political contributor and author of the book, The Imposters, How Republicans Quit Governing and Seized American Politics. And Congressman, good morning, both of you. Congressman, I want to start with you, basically with the title of Steve's book. This isn't governing. There's no part of this is governing. On the night that McCarthy won the speakership on January 7th, you wrote an op-ed for CNN titled "The Deal McCarthy Struck Was an Inexplicable Act of Self-Destruction." In it, you wrote, quote, pragmatic and rational Republican members who bristled at the concessions that McCarthy handed to Gates and his ilk must force a course correction and change the dynamics. This is the moment for rational House Republicans to make their stand, end quote. Doesn't look like anyone took your advice.
No, not at the moment. But Ali, what I will say is that one of my great frustrations when I served in the House was that we had a group in the House who, were the rejectionist wing of the party that could never get to yes, were really, really good at telling you all the things that they could never do, that they just thought that the governing was somehow a sin. It was wrong, and they didn't realize that was part of their job. It was very frustrating. That dynamic remains, except in many respects, it's gotten worse. There's now a subgroup within the House Freedom Caucus that is bent on basically defying leadership at every opportunity, even when they're doing the right thing, say like on the budget agreement and the debt ceiling accord. I mean, those types of things. So this is the frustration, and obviously McCarthy. He had to surrender his way to victory to get that speaker's gavel. And unfortunately, he owes a lot of what he's got right now to Donald Trump. And Trump is not going to go away. We'll see how Trump behaves going forward. We've got the September 30th deadline coming up, and then the year-end omnibus train wreck that will likely occur. I mean, there's still two more big obstacles in the way of governing, as far as I can tell.
And Steve, look, this is an important conversation about Republicans in Congress, but I brought in that stuff about Mike Pence and what he said to sort of indicate that Donald Trump seeds the ground and then everyone else enjoys the fruit of the tree. There's no reason for Mike Pence, who actually did the right thing on January 6th of last year, to be carrying on about cleaning house at the Department of Justice. And yet this is a Trump thing. It's now becoming a Republican thing. It's a thing in the House of Representatives that the deep state involves the highest levels of the FBI and the Department of Justice. And so Mike Pence joins the party.
Right. I think one of my biggest fears going into this election cycle was that we would see a race to the bottom, where Donald Trump kind of sets the standard and he kind of panders to the party's most rabid followers and to the GOP base. And then everyone else enters that race to say, no, I can be more extreme than that. I can one-up Trump and be even more intolerant. I can be even more extreme. I can be even more hostile to democracy. I can promised a clean house of the Justice Department and get rid of officials who otherwise haven't done anything wrong and don't deserve to be ousted. And so I think this race is inherently unhealthy, not only for the Republican Party, but for American politics in general, because it's a race that no one ultimately wins.
Charlie, you got Ron DeSantis, who's trying that race to the bottom. He's trying to out-Trump Trump. He had a crazy ad that came out this week. He implied that Donald Trump's marginally nice to gay people, and that's why he shouldn't be the presidential candidate. On the other hand, you got Will Hurd, who's just joined the race. You got Asa Hutchinson. You got Chris Christie. People who are prepared to take a stand and say, hey, we stand for sort of conservative principles, but not that. I think when you add where these three guys are running, it's about 3% or something of that nature, maybe 4%. Is there any hope that enough people might make it to a debate stage where they can sort of say there's an alternative in the Republican Party, and it doesn't have to be Trump, and it doesn't have to be people who try and out-Trump Trump like DeSantis?
Well, I certainly hope there's a path for Chris Christie and Will Hurd and Asa Hutchinson. But one thing about Christie and Hurd, which differentiates themselves from some of these other Republican candidates, is that they have actually run and won in very difficult places where Republicans aren't really supposed to win. And so they come at this from a very different perspective. They understand the importance of winning independents and swing voters. And they also understand that Trump, is a disaster, is a catastrophe with those types of voters. And what these guys are good at pointing out, and this is where I hope most Republicans will soon get sick of losing. Again, I keep saying that, Trump has made losing great again, because all we've seen since Trump was elected in 2016 for Republicans was defeat. In 2018, the House, 2020, the presidency and the Senate, 2022, a significant underperformance by Republicans. So at some point, the party must get serious about winning. And at least Christie and Hurd and Hutchinson, I think, are talking about that by trying to out-Trump Trump, as some of these other guys are doing. Well, why bother? I mean, why would you take cheap imitation when you can get the real thing?
Right.
I guess. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And Trump they all know he's a disaster. Even the people who are supporting Trump know he is not good for the health of the party or the majorities.
It is Monday, the 10th of July of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious the little Yorkie is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, River City Hatch Mondays. Oh yeah, it's Monday. How are you? And we're here, but we've got some important chores to do today. I take little Precious, the Yorkie, our door girl, in to the eye veterinarian to see what's up with her eyes. And I hope that she's not going to go blind. I fear that maybe that might be the case. One eye looks, when I took her to our regular vet, he said that she is, by all that he can tell, she is blind in one eye, and I'm just afraid the other one might happen. So who knows? She's such a little thing. When my brother gifted her to us, part of the reason is that he has another dog, and more of a puppy and quite rambunctious, and my brother was concerned that maybe the younger, bigger dog might be too rough for the little Yorkie. And I don't know, maybe she got a detached retina. I will find out, but it is amazing how animals adapt. So I'm just hoping that she doesn't have to adapt too much. All right, so that's out of the way, but I mentioned that only because we may have to have longer clips, maybe. I don't know, because I'll have to get out of here as soon as the show is ended, and I might have to actually have longer clips. Anyway, so that I can get out in time, because it's a new place, and I want to make sure I can find it. Given the time constraints. All right. So we had a weekend, and we have the week ahead of us. And why don't we go ahead and dive into what we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe as we begin this River City Hash Mondays at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays. Well, at the top, it is Trump's House of Representatives, and Kevin McCarthy is just living in it. And maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene will or will not. I don't know. I want to remind folks that a lot of people, pundits, etc., are saying that Marjorie Taylor Greene being kicked out of the Freedom Caucus is some sort of proof that she's crazier than the crazies. And actually, the crazies are crazier than Marjorie Taylor Greene because she's hewing with Republican leadership. And I guess Kevin McCarthy is the establishment. So I'm just saying, she's supposedly the sane one. Keep that in mind as we swirl around in this whirlpool of whatever. All right, what do we have on tabs for you here in the Bistro Cafe? For years, the mayor of an Oregon coast city has posted racist, homophobic, and violent memes on a Facebook group for law enforcement. And his excuse was, well, it was supposed to be private. A federal judge found Washington State in contempt for not providing services to mentally ill people in jails. And with pregnancy-related deaths soaring in the state and across the nation, Idaho disbanded its maternal mortality review committee. And, if we don't have any records, then it's all okay. After the break, we move to the chef's table where protests grow as Israel's far-right government advances with its judicial overhaul. And Switzerland will import more cheese than it exports this year for the first time in the Alpine country's history. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, who is attending Netroots Nation in Chicago beginning on Wednesday. So we look forward to hearing from Kelly at Netroots Nation this year, literally under the Netroots Radio banner, because we have one. Thank you, Kelly. If you out there in radio listening land would now look across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the left of that chat room link is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us pay the bills. And thank you to those of you who have done so over these many years. And how have they done it? Well, I'll tell you, if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds to us once a month, buy us an espresso once a month, and we are able to pool those monies with like-minded individuals, patronages, and pay our bills, or at least put a big dent in the bills that we pay, because we still dip into our own wallets because we consider this endeavor to be that important. And it is, no matter how small, a bulwark against the rising fascism here and abroad. So thank you for your generosity over these many years. It really has helped, truly. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and Tom is getting us ready to bug out of Twitter. So do look for us on Mastodon and Spoutable. We'll figure out what we're doing with Threads and all the others. But nonetheless, find us there at Mastodon and Spoutable and Twitter while it's still around. And we are too. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. I put it in queue, put the time on it 10 minutes before showtime, and it comes up. And if you would like to know what the real reportage is, I would suggest you check out those show notes and links, because that's where the real reportage can be found. And you can find those links on my social media feeds. Yes, indeed. If you can't tell, I'm struggling with the allergies today, so bear with me. Now, if you would like to follow Netroots, or not Netroots, if you would like to follow the show on Twitter, you can do so at Cookbook West. And most importantly, if you would, please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, not Stitcher, but TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Stitcher, I got, for as long as we've had Netroots Radio, we've been on Stitcher. They gave us a really good introductory beta set, invite too, and we had been running live on Stitcher all these years, and now we're not. Because of Sirius XM. How dare they? All right, let us look into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it's by Jonathan Levinson out of Oregon Public Broadcasting. The Newport City Council declared June to be LGBTQ plus Pride Month in the city on June 5th. However, after the City Council CM Hall read the declaration, Mayor Dean Sawyer thanked her for taking the lead on the declaration. He also thanked the members of the public who sent emails appreciating the council for supporting the LGBTQ plus community. 6 days later, Sawyer posted a meme mocking a trans dancer in a private Facebook group exclusively for current and retired law enforcement officers. That post followed several others he made in April and May. The anti-trans protests are among at least 7 anti-LGBTQ, misogynist, vulgar, and violent memes he posted to the group in June. The group, called LEO Only, Leo, Law Enforcement, has 39,180 members. To join, a person must send moderators a photograph of their law enforcement identification next to an item showing that day's date, such as a newspaper. Oregon Public Broadcasting was able to independently review posts inside the group, including those made by Sawyer's account. Since 2016, Sawyer has posted racist memes mocking Mexicans and endorsing Trump's hardline policies on immigration. One post in April made fun of trans swimmer Leah Thomas. Several mocked Bud Light, which has drawn the ire of Republicans for the company's business relationship with trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney. Both Thomas and Mulvaney have been targets of right-wing smear campaigns and online harassment. Sawyer was first elected mayor in 2018 after serving 30 years as a Newport police officer. Wow, a racist cop all that time. Shocking. He was re-elected to a third term in 2022. Reached by phone for comment, he said, "Law enforcement only is a private group and posts are not meant for the public." No shit, Sherlock. Sawyer told Oregon Public Broadcasting one of the reasons he loves Newport is the community's diversity and that his public actions and comments represent his true values, not what he says in private. Except Nobody believes that. Martha Belizel of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. A federal judge has found Washington State in contempt and ordered it to pay more than $100 million in fines for failing to provide timely psychiatric services to mentally ill people who are forced to wait in jails for weeks or months. In her order released late Friday, U.S. District Judge Marcia Petchman said the Washington Department of Social and Health Services has been violating the constitutional right of these people since 2015 due to a lack of foresight, creativity, planning, and timely response to a crisis of its own making. The ruling stems from a federal lawsuit filed on behalf of people with mental health disabilities who were charged with crimes and ordered by a judge to have a competency evaluation. If found incompetent to face charges, the state must then provide services to restore their competency. A lack of funding, personnel, and beds in mental health facilities forced them to wait in jails for extended periods, which violated their rights, according to the lawsuit. The state entered into a settlement agreement in 2018 and agreed to address the wait times, but they've only grown longer, the judge said. Instead of providing more space in its psychiatric hospitals, the state closed wards. The court is unpersuaded that DSHS adequately planned for and took reasonable measures to address the bed shortage, Petchman said. It continued to accrue fines as it missed its court-ordered marks. Those funds were held in abeyance, but Petchman now wants the state to pay $100 million of those fines. Natalie Satcher of the Kaiser Foundation Health News portal brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. On July 1st, Idaho became the only state without a legal requirement or specialized committee to review maternal deaths related to pregnancy. The change comes after state lawmakers, in the midst of a national upsurge in maternal deaths, decided not to extend a sunset date for the panel that had been set in 2019 when they established the state's Maternal Mortality Review Committee, or MMRC. The committee was composed of a family medicine physician, an OBGYN, a midwife, a coroner, and a social worker, in addition to others who track deaths in Idaho that occur from pregnancy-related complications. Wyoming studies its maternal deaths through a shared committee with Utah. All other states, as well as Washington, D.C., New York City, Philadelphia, and Puerto Rico, have an MMRC, according to the Guttmacher Institute, a reproductive rights research group. A majority of the state committees were established within the past decade as federal officials scrambled to understand state and local data to address gaps in maternal care. The committees review deaths that occur within a year of pregnancy and identify trends, share findings, and suggest policy changes. You know, that woke stuff. Liz Woodruff, executive director of the Idaho Academy of Family Physicians, said she was incredibly disappointed by the legislature's decision to scuttle the committee. It seems relevant that the state of Idaho supports a committee that works toward preventing the deaths of pregnant women. She said this should be easy. The committee disbanded despite a high rate of maternal mortality in the United States that exceeds those of other high-income countries. The U.S. recorded 23.8 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births in 2020, compared to 8.4 in Canada and 3.6 in Germany. And the U.S. rate is sharply rising. In March, a few weeks before Idaho lawmakers adjourned their 2023 session, the CDC released data that showed the maternal mortality rate in the U.S. climbed in 2021 to 32.9 deaths per 100,000. Once again, 8.4 in Canada, 3.6 in Germany. Idaho has a particularly acute problem. Its pregnancy-related mortality ratio was 41.8 pregnancy-related deaths per 100,000 live births, and that was according to the Maternal Mortality Review Committee reported that year of 2020. Hillary Hagan of Idaho Voices for Children, a nonprofit focused on low and moderate income families, said that the committee used the Idaho-specific data to do deep dive analyses and that an information void would be left by shuttering the board. The decision to disband the board came as two hospitals that serve rural areas announced they would stop providing services for expectant mothers. One of the hospitals cited trouble recruiting and retaining OBGYNs after the state last summer enacted one of the strictest abortion bans in the country. The committee, tasked with investigating deaths both individually and collectively, found that almost half of the maternal deaths in Idaho in 2020 occurred after delivery. All right, that takes us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You were listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Not Dialed Back. Plans for a fifth Indiana Jones movie go back to the 70s, when 4 sequels were negotiated after Raiders. With passing time and corporate changes, this one, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, is the first not conceived by Lucas or directed by Spielberg. Instead, directorial duties have fallen to James Mangold of Logan and Ford vs. Ferrari fame, and he and his 9-figure budget have done a good job wrapping the franchise. For villains, we're back to Nazis. This one opens in 1944 with Harrison Ford's character on a train full of Nazi loot, where we're introduced to an archaeological object said to facilitate time travel. More accurately, it's half the object. Fast forward 25 years and we find the combatants from the train, Indy, now a Columbia professor, and the Nazi officer, now working for NASA, globetrotting to find the other half. The quote-unquote former Nazi has some corrections in mind for the timeline vis-a-vis vis-a-vis World War II. As expected, familiar characters appear, though the film doesn't seem weighed down by subplots to accommodate such appearances. New cast members included dazzling Phoebe Waller-Bridge as Indy's goddaughter and actual daughter of Indy's colleague from the opening scene. Her character is that of an antiquities dealer of dubious ethics, but who's always on the right side when it counts, and Mads Mikkelsen, bringing off the Nazi Jürgen Voller with evil aplomb. Is Indiana Jones the Dial of Destiny an unintentional metaphor for recapturing past thrills? Maybe. Once again, we get chases, walks through caves, and we even see the whip in one scene, though it feels a bit forced. Even if it is that metaphor, though, it's a must-see for generations of fans. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Science Quickly. I'm Andrea Thompson, editor for Earth and Environment.
And I'm Jeff Del Vicio, chief multimedia editor.
And today we're talking El Niño.
Because it's back.
I am El Niño. All other tropical storms must bow before El Niño.
Okay, so just in case you didn't catch the reference, that was comic Chris Farley.
In 1997, on Saturday Night Live, Farley did this bit because that was the year of one of the strongest El Niños on record.
So it was definitely on the public's mind in a big way, though he got the science wrong.
Yeah, it was hilarious, but he did. I mean, he's a comic, he's not a scientist, but El Niño is not a tropical storm, like he said.
What it actually is a natural climate pattern.
It's a cycle, really, a push and pull between wind and water over the Pacific Ocean.
Right. The whole cycle is actually called ENSO, the El Niño Southern Oscillation. The oscillation part is because it seesaws between warm and cold states every 2 to 7 years.
Okay, so Andrea, let's help everyone sort of mentally picture this.
Right. So imagine we're out in the tropical Pacific, kind of hovering above the Earth, looking down.
And we need to be able to see the temperature of the ocean below us, right?
That's right. And that's important because when El Niño really gets going, what we'd see is this tremendously large lobe of warm water that starts to stretch across the equatorial Pacific from east moving west.
And that's not how it normally looks in that part of the Pacific, right?
Right. Normally, during the neutral setting, as it's called, the western tropical Pacific is much warmer than the eastern.
So that's just one way to tell if El Niño is in effect. But how warm is that lobe of water and how long does it last?
So to technically be an El Niño, it has to be 0.5 degrees Celsius above normal. And it has to stay that way for at least 3 months. And by the way, it has a counterpart, La Niña, with cold waters 0.5 degrees Celsius below average. But that's a podcast for another day.
Got it. So we've got this big anomalous water feature. But the effects of the El Niño don't stop the ocean, do they?
Nope. The whole climate system is interconnected, and the ocean affects the atmosphere. And the El Niño has some pretty drastic effects on what happens with weather elsewhere. It's like a weather domino effect when it gets going.
Okay, so let's do a rundown of some of those dominoes. What are they and where do they happen?
Okay, so here are some major examples of effects. Instead of the usual rising air and rainy conditions in Southeast Asia, that area sees subsiding air, which means dry weather and can cause drought. In 2016, for example, there was a major drought in Indonesia that caused food shortages and helped fuel huge wildfires. Meanwhile, other places, such as parts of Eastern Africa and parts of South America, often see higher rainfall, which can cause major flooding. And changes in looping air patterns also alter things like the jet stream across the U.S. and tends to bring cooler weather to the south and warmer to the north. But it's not all bad news. We do tend to see less hurricane activity in the Atlantic. That's because the atmosphere is more stable. Hurricanes need unstable air to get going. But this year, there are also super warm ocean waters. That's like hurricane fuel. And it's hard to know which influence will win out. So TBD on that one.
Wow, that's like a global weather monkey wrench. But, you know, the reason we're talking about this today on the podcast is because the Niño is here. So, news you can use time. What might we expect from this one?
So that's really tricky to forecast. But right now, there are slightly better than even odds that this event will develop into a strong one. It should build in strength in the coming months, and typically El Niños peak in the Northern Hemisphere winter. And strength is important because we have more confidence we'll see certain effects when it's stronger. But nothing's a guarantee. a strong event in 2016 didn't bring needed rains to Southern California as one in 1998 did.
So we're mostly talking about weather there, but how is it going to affect global temperatures? Things that are already getting warmer with climate change. Does El Nino add to that? Take away?
Unfortunately, an El Nino would add to the heat for sure. They always bump up the global average temperature and can frequently set yearly heat records. 2016, for example, is still the hottest year on record thanks in part to the major El Nino that year. But really, it's adding on to the background global warming signal. For example, 2016 was 0.5 degrees Celsius warmer than 1998, and at the time, 1998 was far and away the hottest year on record. Given El Nino and a good chance it will be strong, there's also a good chance we'll see a global heat record this year or next.
Well, more heat on top of our already hotter world ain't great. But honestly, knowing how El Nino works shows in a pretty profound way that everything in the Earth's climate is really connected.
Yep, that's right. This change in the ocean and air thousands of miles away from where you live will affect your weather in the coming months. And once you know it, you can prepare for it.
And to help you do that, here are some sites you can go to track how Nino-ish this one is getting. We'll leave links in the show transcript.
So there's the Climate Prediction Center at NOAA. That's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And it puts out weekly and seasonal forecasts.
And Columbia University has this group called the International Research Institute for Climate and Society. They have an El Nino forecast, so you can know if it's coming before it gets going. But you can also track it as it goes, too.
And if you live in the Southern Hemisphere, Australia's Bureau of Meteorology is a great one to hit up.
And, of course, Andrea is on this. So you can always check out SciAm.com for El Nino news as it develops.
This is my life.
It's a good thing. It's news we can all use.
Science Quickly is produced by Tulika Bose, Jeff Del Vicio, Kelso Harper, and Corinne Leung. The show was edited by Ella Feder and Alex Alem. Our show's music was composed by Dominic Smith.
And before you go, please consider supporting independent journalism like this. Become a Scientific American subscriber today.
And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify.
For Science Quickly, I'm Jeff Del Vicio.
And I'm Andrea Thompson.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There are several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or Naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
About 150 years ago, General Philip Sheridan was sweltering in the relentless heat of a Texas summer. He was not happy. "If I owned Texas and all hell," he groused, "I would rent out Texas and live in hell." Summer has always been hot here, but 2023 has been something else, thanks to a hellish heat dome that has been baking us since late spring, sending daily temps up to 116 degrees. But worse, a more punishing heat has hit us from an even stranger, unnatural dome, the Texas state capitol. That's where our malicious governor, Greg Abbott, and his GOP majority of extremist right-wing lawmakers rigged the rules to make life easier and richer for corporate elites and much harder for working people. In this year's legislative session, they rammed a nasty piece of plutocratic meanness into law that critics dubbed Death Star. It annihilates the basic right of local officials and voters to govern their own cities and counties. In particular, it empowers autocratic state officials and even corporate executives to nullify decisions by localities to protect workers and others from corporate abuse. In a cruel case of bad timing, the first local law targeted for nullification by the Texas GOP is a humane requirement in Dallas and other cities that developers provide 10-minute water breaks for construction workers. This in a state with America's highest rate of heat-related deaths and presently suffering biblical-level heat. Triple-digit temperatures kill, yet Abbott, his air-conditioned legislative cronies, and his corporate campaign donors whined that a required water break was, quote, an oppressive burden on the extraordinarily rich construction industry. This is Jim Hightower saying, here's a new rule I'd like to see. No lawmaker or lobbyist is allowed to oppose heat protections for workers unless they spend July and August with no air conditioning for themselves. Howdy ho, folks, and thanks for tuning in to my Hightower Radio commentaries. And guess what? There's even more Hightower waiting for you online. Subscribers to my Substack newsletter, Jim Hightower's Lowdown, get commentaries, articles, interviews with progressive sparklies, live events, historical nuggets, and more. Go to jimhightower.substack.com to sign up, and you'll get more. That's jimhightower.substack.com.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. That was the day that labor leader Eugene V. Debs was arrested for supporting the strike of Pullman Palace Car Company workers. In May, the workers who made the popular train sleeping cars had walked off the job. George Pullman had slashed the workers' wages, but kept the rents in his company town steady. The striking workers called on Eugene Debs to support their strike. Debs had made a name for himself in the labor movement by successfully founding the American Railway Union. The union joined together railroad workers in an unprecedented force of solidarity across job types. In June, the union voted to boycott Pullman in support of the train car makers. As rail traffic ground to a halt, the federal government moved in to end the strike. Federal troops were called out. A federal court issued an injunction against Debs and the boycott. The basis for Debs' arrest was the claim that the boycott interfered with the delivery of the U.S. mail by the trains. Debs served a 6-month jail sentence in Woodstock, Illinois. His case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which decided in favor of the injunctions. When Debs was released from prison, he delivered a speech he called Liberty. In it, he declared, quote, "The people have seen the money power practicing at every art of duplicity, growing more arrogant and despotic as it robbed one and crushed another, building its fortification of the bones of its victims, and its palaces out of the profits of its piracies." The Pullman strike and the American Railway Union were crushed, and injunctions became a powerful tool against the labor movement.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.